In this video on demand, we will configure AAA and TACACS. Specifically, the topology is fairly simple. Router R1 is our AAA client, and all that's configured on router R1 is a host name and enable secret, and the interface, the Fast Ethernet 00 interface, has been configured with IP address 192.168.10.1, and the interface is active. The server that I'm currently on is this ACS server. It's located at 192.168.10.50. Now, before we begin the actual configuration, we should verify connectivity between this server and the AAA client. So for that, I'll open up a DOS window, and I will ping the server address, the AAA client address, and router R1 is responding. And just because I'm always a little bit paranoid about connectivity, I've established a console connection with router R1 as well, and I will ping the server at 192.168.10.50, and we do have connectivity. So at this point, we're ready to configure Cisco Secure ACS. So to do so, I'll open up the browser window and connect to Cisco Secure ACS. Now, this is the trial version which I've downloaded from cisco.com, and again, you remember that you need a valid CCO account to do so. There are really two basic tasks that we have to configure in Cisco Secure ACS. The first, we have to identify router R1 as a AAA client, and we do so under the network configuration menu. Next, we'll have to configure a user, and we will do that under the user setup menu. So let's start by configuring the AAA client. So I'll go to Network Configuration. As you can see, there are currently no AAA clients. I want to add an entry, and specifically I will add router R1 as our AAA client. Its IP address is 192.168.10.1, and the shared secret that I'm going to configure the router with, or that I will establish a connection with the router with, is going to be TACACS PA55. Now I'll submit and apply that, and as confirmation we can see that router R1 has indeed been added as a AAA client, and that we will use TACACS Plus between this server and that client. Now I'm ready for the second task. I need to add users. Now, users can be added through a Windows database, such as Active Directory, or we can add users to the internal ACS database. Currently, if I say list all users, you can see that there are no users listed. So I will start by creating a user called admin1. I'll select the add button. And there are a variety of options that I can configure for this user, but specifically at this time, the only thing I really need to configure is a password. And the password will be admin1PA55. And I'll verify that, confirm it by retyping it, admin1PA55. And I'll submit that. Now, we return to the initial screen and we don't see that admin1 has been added unless we click list all users again, and now we can see that admin1 has been added. This is all we're going to do with Cisco Secure ACS at this time. We now need to configure the AAA client. So to do so, I will open up my console connection with router R1, and I'll go into global configuration mode. Now, as a backup, I'm going to create a local database account. And I'll call it admin with the password adminPA55. This is just as a fallback in case my TACACS server is not reachable. Now I'm going to enable AAA, and I do so with the AAA new model command. Now specifically, I'm going to configure two ways of accessing the router. I'm going to configure a default authentication method, which is going to refer to the TACACS server, and as a backup it would refer to the local database. And then I'm going to configure a named authentication list specifically for the telnet connections. So let's start off by configuring the TACACS server information. The TACACS server information that I have to provide is its IP address and the shared secret. So I'll use the TACACS server host command, and it's located at 192.168.10. Now remember, this is the server that I'm identifying to the client, and the server is located at 192.168.10.50. I'll now configure the shared secret, and for that it's TACACS server key, and remember the key that we typed in Cisco Secure ACS. It was TACACS PA55. Now it's imperative that these two keys match. As an alternative, I could have entered both options with one command. I could have simply said TACACS server host with its IP address and then add key TACACS PA55. Now I'm ready to enter the authentication methods. To do so, I'll use the AAA authentication command, and this is for logins. And our choices here is to use the default list or a named list. We'll start with the default list. The default list, once it's configured, is applied automatically to the console, VTY, and aux ports. So I'll specify default. Now, as the first method list, I want it to refer to the TACACS server. So I'll say group TACACS plus. As a fallback, I want it to refer to the local database. But I also want it to be case sensitive on the username. By default, if I was to say local, the username could be entered uppercase or lowercase. The password must be entered exactly as configured. If I say local case, now the username must also be entered exactly the way that it was configured. And as you can see, our username was configured with a capital A. So in this case here, local case will have to match capital A admin. And now remember, this is the default method. Now the console line, the aux line, and VTY lines are automatically configured to use the TACACS server. I also want to configure a named list specifically just for Telnet. So I will repeat the AAA authentication command. Again, we're going to use login, but now we're going to create a special named list. And I always use uppercase characters to identify any variables that we enter in an iOS configuration. It makes it easier to identify when you do a show run. So here I'm going to say VTY login. It doesn't have to be uppercase, but again, I've chosen to make it uppercase. And we will refer to the TACACS server, and there will be no fallback method. This is what will make each authentication method different. Now, a named list is not applied anywhere until you actually go on the line and tell the line to use that authentication method. So for this reason, I'm going to say line VTY 04, and make sure you do all five VTY lines. And I'll say login, authentication, and I have to refer to my named list, VTY login. At this point, we have basically configured the basics of the AAA client. And let's verify that it actually will refer to the AAA service. So I will end this, and I'll also enable a debug command that allows to see which method list it's using. So the command for that will be debug AAA authentication. Debug is now active. So what I'll do at this point is I'm now going to telnet from a host to the AAA client. The host that I'm going to use is this server just for testing purposes. I'll open my DOS window again, and I'll say telnet 192.168.10.1. So assume that I'm a regular user, administrative user, trying to gain access to my router. So it's prompting me for a username, and you can see that the debug AAA authentication command is letting me know that it's using the VTY-login authentication method. And remember that the name that we've configured on our AAA server is admin1, and its password was admin1pa55. And we have now authenticated using AAA.